Hello, my name is Anita Laidlaw and I am Head of Division of Education at the School of Medicine and Co-Director of the Centre for Higher Education Research based at the University of St Andrews. And thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. I've been asked to speak from the perspective of a practitioner in higher education research. And I'd like to pose the question, what is higher education research and how can it support us going forward? And we're all having our lives ruled at the moment by this virus, COVID-19, and I'd like to think about that question of what is higher education research and how can it support us going forward in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'd like to explore what higher education research is through that lens. So if I were to ask everybody, think of an example of a higher education research project, then I suspect many of you would initially think of some kind of pedagogical research project. And by that I mean a higher education research project that focuses on understanding how best to support the learning of students. And of course, in the COVID-19 era, that's a lot of that attention is focused on the sudden switch to the use of online learning, remote teaching for higher education students. And you can think of many examples of potential higher education research projects in that area. So how are students using these online resources and online learning software that we're providing for them? Do they interact with that in the way that we anticipate they would interact with it? And if they do or if they don't, how can we best support their learning? So that would be an example of a pedagogical higher education research. But higher education research is broader than pedagogical research. And here's an example that moves away slightly from that. We can think of higher education research in this COVID era, which focuses on student well-being. What's the impact of the COVID pandemic on student well-being? Yes, we're all having to cope with the pandemic situation, but are there specific concerns for higher education research, higher education students within that? Is there value in exploring, for example, the experiences of overseas students who might have been unable to travel home because of restrictions? What's their experiences? What's the impact of those experiences? But looking forward, there may also be value in examining the cohort who might be starting university in the autumn. They are a cohort who will be starting university, perhaps not geographically located near their institution, and their experience of activities which might in normal years enhance their sense of student identity, affiliation with their institution and embeddedness in their course of studies. Those activities may be curtailed or may be very differently experienced, and that can impact on their well-being, and it can also impact on their likelihood of retention on the course as well. But we can also think about higher education research examining the admissions process to university. Again, we've got an unusual cohort of students who will be coming into university in the autumn. Their assessment at school and college will have been significantly disrupted by COVID. What's the implications there for the admissions process? and ensuring that it is fair and equitable. It may be that the remote teaching that these students have experienced at schools and colleges may be particularly impactful from those who are disadvantaged in other ways. And we need to make sure that our admissions process takes heed of that. But it's also not likely just this cohort of students who are entering university in the autumn this year who might be impacted by COVID. Future cohorts might be as well, and we need to examine our admissions processes to ensure that these are fair, and higher education research can help us to do that. But higher education research isn't solely focusing on student research as well. A significant proportion of the higher education sector is, of course, academics, and there's been debate and discussion about the academic job role for some time now, and its potential impact on well-being. How has this been affected by COVID? What's the current situation in terms of academic well-being? And if changes such as the significant switch to remote and online teaching continues in the future, what does that do to the picture or the traditional view of what an academic is? We can move to higher education research focusing on the institutions themselves. What's the impact of the COVID pandemic on higher education institutions? Is there a significant impact, and we know that there is, on projected financial models? Does that mean that we should be considering changing those financial models? We may have to change those financial models, and higher education research can help us understand how best to do that. And then finally, there's research itself. What's the impact of COVID on research? We know that there's been a pause to some research activity. And what about the early career researchers within this pandemic? They are often quite exposed and vulnerable on short-term contracts which are related to project-specific funding. What's their situation at the moment, and what's their situation going forward? The academic world might look very different. Conferences will have to change their focus perhaps and the way that they are delivered, and what are the effects of that for research networking going forward? So I hope you get the sense from this kind of brief snapshot of potential COVID-related higher education research that it's actually a very broad area of research, and it draws on many theoretical perspectives. Some of the potential research in higher education that I've just suggested here draws on theory from education, yes, but from psychology, from computer science, from economics. There are many theoretical perspectives that can be brought together in the melting pot of higher education research. And we are all academics, and we're in an uncertain world at the moment, and we all use our subject-specific research skills in our subject-specific research, but we could bring those research skills to higher education research to make sure that the recovery of the higher education sector from COVID-19 pandemic is evidence-based. And we know from previous research that effective multidisciplinary care results in better outcomes for patients. So let's make sure that multidisciplinary research can make the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic for the higher education sector as best as it can be. Thank you.